I was 60 years old, standing in my son Garrett's lavish housewarming party, a profound sense of pride swelling in my chest. Everyone there, from the casually dressed guests to the impeccably suited financial types, seemed to echo the same sentiment. Garrett was a financial genius. They spoke of how he'd transformed shrewd investments into a staggering fortune before his 35th birthday. I watched him, tanned and confident, holding court, and thought, "This is my son." Then, my wife, Caroline, suddenly grabbed my arm. Her face was drained of color, her eyes wide with an unreadable panic. "We need to leave right now," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the jazz quartet. I froze. "Why? What's going on?" I asked, but she didn't answer, her grip on my arm tightening as she pulled me through the throng of laughing guests. We moved with an urgency that felt out of place, amidst the clinking glasses and easy conversation. It wasn't until we were safely in the car, the hum of the engine a stark contrast to the party's distant murmur, that she finally spoke. With trembling hands, she fumbled with her phone, her gaze fixed on me. "Didn't you see it?" she whispered, her voice laced with a tremor. I frowned, confusion clouding my mind. "See what?" She turned the phone to me, displaying a photo she had taken upstairs. The image was of a framed certificate, a diploma, hanging on a wall, in what I presumed was Garrett's new home office. As my eyes focused on the details, my heart nearly stopped beating. It was a framed degree from Florida Gulf Coast University, bearing the name Vivian Cross. Vivian, Garrett's wife, but the date on the diploma, the year of graduation, was impossible. It was dated years before she had told us she even attended college. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, a feeling I couldn't yet name, but one that promised to unravel everything. 4 weeks before that moment, before I found myself in a federal courtroom in Fort Myers, watching a bailiff place his hands on my son's shoulders, I had been standing in Garrett's driveway on Port Royal Drive. I remembered telling myself I had never been prouder of anything in my life. Port Royal was the kind of neighborhood that made you slow down, even if you had no business being there. The houses sat back from the road behind iron gates and rows of mature royal palms, lit up at night like something from a television show about people who had solved all their problems. Garrett's house, and I still had trouble thinking of it as his house, even after he had walked us through every room twice, was at the end of a curved private drive, 3 stories of white stucco and glass, facing a canal that opened out toward the Gulf. I had looked up the property records 2 months earlier, the way a father does when he is trying to decide whether to feel proud or worried. The listing price had been $4,200,000. Garrett was 33 years old and ran a financial investment firm he had founded 4 years ago. I told myself it was possible. I told myself I had raised a brilliant son. Caroline squeezed my arm as we walked toward the front entrance, her heels clicking on the imported stone pavers. She was wearing the blue dress she saved for occasions she wanted to remember, and her silver hair was pinned back the way she wore it when she was trying to look composed. She had been quieter than usual on the drive over, which I had attributed to the traffic on US 41. "It's something, isn't it?" she said, and her voice carried something I could not quite name. Not quite admiration, not quite unease, but something hovering in the space between the two. "It really is," I said, trying to sound more convinced than I felt. The front door opened before we reached it, and there was Garrett, tanned and broad-shouldered in a charcoal linen jacket, his dark hair swept back, grinning the way he used to grin when he was 8 years old and had just done something he wanted applause for. "Dad!" He pulled me into a handshake that became a half-hug, the kind men do when they are not sure how much warmth the moment calls for. "Mom, you look incredible." Caroline laughed and let him kiss her cheek. "You say that every time, because it's true every time." The foyer alone was larger than the living room of the house where I had raised him. A chandelier the size of a small car hung overhead, casting warm light across a marble floor. Somewhere deeper inside the house, a jazz quartet was playing something low and elegant. The smell of catered food drifted through from the back terrace, something with citrus and garlic and, unmistakably, money. There were at least 80 people inside. Vivian appeared from the direction of the kitchen, moving through the crowd with the kind of effortless precision that I had always found slightly unnerving. She was Garrett's wife of 2 years, 31 years old, dark-haired with sharp green eyes that had a way of taking inventory of a room in the time it took most people to say hello. She was dressed in a deep burgundy gown that made everyone around her look like they were wearing the wrong thing. "Warren," she kissed my cheek, her perfume expensive and faint. "We're so glad you made it. Wouldn't miss it," I said. She smiled, and her eyes moved past me to Caroline, and then back across the room toward Garrett. The whole exchange lasted perhaps 4 seconds. I had learned in 2 years of being her father-in-law that Vivian processed information the way a surgeon operates, quickly, cleanly, without visible emotion. Garrett steered us toward the back terrace, where the real party was happening. A bartender in a white jacket was working a marble-topped outdoor bar. Beyond the terrace, the canal shimmered under string lights, a small motorboat tied to the private dock. The catering staff moved through the crowd, with trays of champagne and small plates of food that looked too beautiful to eat. Absolutely stunning place, son. Absolutely stunning. Howard Beale, a heavy-set man in his early 50s, appeared at my son's elbow, clapping him on the shoulder with the enthusiasm of someone who had already had 2 glasses of champagne. Howard was Garrett's next-door neighbor on Port Royal Drive, a retired commercial real estate developer from Atlanta who had relocated to Naples 7 years ago. He had the handshake of a man who had made his money the old-fashioned way and wanted you to feel it. "You must be the father, the famous Warren Holt." "If famous might be generous," I said. Howard laughed and pointed a finger at me. "Your boy talks about you constantly, says everything he knows about numbers he learned from you." He lowered his voice with the conspiratorial warmth of a man sharing a compliment. "Real credit to you, Warren. Real credit." I thanked him. I watched Garrett across the terrace, holding court in front of a semicircle of guests, his hands moving as he talked, his voice rising and falling with the cadence of a man who had learned that confidence is its own form of currency. I caught fragments of what he was saying. Algorithmic positioning, asymmetric return profiles, the next 18 months in digital asset markets. My chest tightened in a way I could not immediately explain. I had spent 35 years as a certified public accountant in Naples, building a practice one client at a time, driving a sensible car, coaching Garrett's Little League team on Saturday mornings. I knew what real money looked like when it was built. Honestly, it looked like patience. It looked like boring decisions made carefully over a long time. $4 million houses at 33 did not look like patience. I pushed the thought away. I had pushed that same thought away 7 or 8 times in the past year. Each time Garrett mentioned a new acquisition or a new round of investor interest. I was a 60-year-old man from a generation that distrusted its own doubts, and Garrett was my son, and I did not want to be the kind of father who poisoned his own pride with suspicion. Caroline had drifted away from my side, somewhere between the terrace and the indoor dining room. I assumed she had found someone she knew. I stayed on the terrace with Howard, half listening to his opinions about Gulf-front property values, my eyes following Garrett as he moved from one cluster of guests to another, always at the center, always performing. It was 30 minutes later when I noticed Caroline had not come back. I found her by the front staircase, standing very still with one hand pressed flat against the wall, as though the wall were the only thing keeping her upright. Her face was pale, and her eyes were fixed on something I couldn't immediately see. "Caroline, are you all right?" I asked, stepping closer. She flinched, startled, then slowly turned to me. Her gaze was distant, unfocused. "We have to go, Warren. Now." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the urgency in it was unmistakable. It was the same tone she'd used when she saw a car swerving on the highway, a warning that demanded immediate action. "What is it? What's wrong?" I pressed, a knot forming in my stomach. She didn't answer, just pulled me by the arm, her strength surprising. We navigated through the crowd, past smiling faces and clinking glasses, her pace quickening with every step. I tried to catch Garrett's eye, to offer some excuse for our abrupt departure, but he was deep in conversation, oblivious. Once we were in the car, the engine purring to life, Caroline finally spoke, her voice trembling as she held up her phone. "Didn't you see it?" she asked, her eyes wide. I squinted at the photo she'd taken, a framed diploma, hanging prominently in what I now realized was Vivian's home office. "See what?" I asked, still not understanding. "The date, Warren. Look at the graduation date." My eyes scanned the elegant script. Florida Gulf Coast University. Vivian Cross. Class of 2010. A cold wave washed over me. But she told us she graduated in 2016, I stammered, the words catching in my throat. "She said she went back to school after working for a few years." Caroline nodded, her face grim. "Exactly. I saw it when I went upstairs to use the restroom. It was hanging right there, in plain sight. I knew something was off." She took a shaky breath. "I remember her talking about her gap years before college, about how she worked to save up. But if she graduated in 2010, that means she would have been 21 or 22, not 27 or 28 like she claimed." The implications hit me like a physical blow. Vivian had lied, not just a small white lie, but a fundamental deception about her past, her education, her very identity. What else had she lied about? My mind raced back to the fragments of Garrett's conversation, the complex financial jargon, the $4 million house. The unease I had felt earlier, the one I had so easily dismissed as a father's anxiety, now returned with a vengeance, amplified by a chilling certainty. This was more than just a discrepancy in a graduation date. This was a crack in the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my son's life. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and quiet conversations with Caroline, each one deepening the pit in my stomach. We tried to rationalize it, to find an innocent explanation, but none came. The lie about the diploma felt like a loose thread, and I had a terrible feeling that if we pulled it, the entire tapestry of Garrett's success might unravel. My accounting instincts, honed over decades of meticulous record-keeping, began to kick in. I started doing some discreet digging, not wanting to alert Garrett or Vivian. I looked up Vivian Cross on various professional networking sites, cross-referencing information, searching for any inconsistencies. What I found was a carefully curated online presence, a narrative of success that felt too perfect, too polished. There were no early career records, no internships, nothing to fill the gap between her supposed graduation in 2010 and her emergence as a successful financial professional. Then, an anonymous email arrived. The subject line was simply, "Holt Investments." My heart pounded as I opened it. The email contained a single sentence, "Ask about Shelby." No sender name, no other details. Just ask about Shelby. I spent the next few days trying to figure out who Shelby was. It wasn't a common name among Garrett's known employees or associates. I even subtly tried to bring it up in conversation with Garrett, but he brushed it off, claiming he didn't recognize the name. His dismissiveness, however, felt forced, a little too quick. The breakthrough came when I remembered a local coffee shop, the Daily Grind, where Garrett often held informal meetings. I decided to stake it out, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone who might fit the description. On the third day, I saw her, a young woman, perhaps in her mid-20s, with an air of quiet efficiency, clearing tables and serving coffee. She looked tired, her eyes holding a faint sadness. Something about her demeanor, the way she moved, suggested a past beyond the coffee shop counter. I approached her cautiously, introducing myself as Warren Holt, Garrett's father. Her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise, then apprehension. "Shelby?" I asked softly. She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Can we talk? Somewhere private?" We sat at a secluded table in the back. Shelby was hesitant at first, her gaze darting around the room, as if expecting someone to overhear. But as I explained my concerns, my voice calm and reassuring, she slowly began to open up. "I was hired as an executive assistant at Holt Investments," she began, her voice low. "In practice, that meant I handled correspondence, prepared client documents, and managed the filing system for both the client accounts and the internal transaction records." She paused, taking a deep breath. 8 weeks ago, I was asked to prepare a batch of quarterly statements for a group of clients. The returns listed on those statements did not match the actual transaction records I had access to in the internal system. The numbers going out to clients were higher than the numbers actually being generated. You understood what that meant? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. I have a finance degree from Florida Gulf Coast University, she said quietly. Yes, I understood what it meant. Did you say anything to Garrett? Her jaw tightened. I asked him about the discrepancy. He told me it was a rounding methodology difference between two reporting systems and that I should not worry about it. She exhaled slowly through her nose. That night, Vivian called me directly on my personal cell phone, which I had never given her. She told me that employees who created unnecessary complications for the company tended to find the job market in Naples very difficult. A short, humorless breath. She knew where I lived. She mentioned my street by name. My hand tightened around my coffee cup, the heat of it pressing into my palm. That is when I made the backup, Shelby said. I stayed late 2 nights later and copied the entire transaction database onto an external drive. Every client account, every internal transfer, every wire instruction for the past 2 years. I did not know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that if something happened and I did not have it, I would never be able to prove what I had seen. She looked at me directly. I have been sleeping with it in my nightstand ever since. Shelby, I leaned forward slightly. I want you to know something before we go any further. There is a federal program called the SEC Whistleblower Program, established under the Dodd-Frank Act. It provides legal protection to employees who report securities violations to the Securities and Exchange Commission or to federal law enforcement. You cannot be fired, demoted, or threatened for coming forward. And in cases involving significant fraud, whistleblowers are entitled to financial compensation between 10 and 30% of any sanctions over $1 million collected by the government. I watched her face as I said it. You would not be doing this alone. Her eyes filled. She blinked rapidly and pressed her lips together and looked at the table. For a moment, I thought she was going to excuse herself and walk back behind the counter, and I would never see that drive. Her shoulders rose and fell with a breath that shook slightly going out. Then she reached into the pocket of her apron. The external drive was smaller than I expected, a flat black rectangle about the size of a matchbox, unremarkable in every way. She set it on the table between us and slid it toward me with 2 fingers, the way you slide something across a table when you are not quite ready to let go of it, but have decided to anyway. 2 years of records, she said. Her voice had dropped to barely above a whisper. Every transaction, every client, every offshore transfer instruction. She finally let go of the drive. There is a folder labeled Internal Memos. Read those first. I picked it up and put it in my jacket pocket. It weighed almost nothing. It felt like the heaviest thing I had carried in years. What happens to me now? She asked. Elliot Marsh, my attorney, will contact you today. He will walk you through the whistleblower filing process and make sure you are protected before any of this becomes public. I stood up and pushed my chair back. You did the right thing, Shelby. I know it did not feel that way for 8 weeks, but you did. She nodded once, her eyes still bright, her hands still pressed flat on the table. She did not look entirely convinced, but she looked like someone who had made a decision and intended to stand behind it. I walked out onto Gordon Drive into the Wednesday morning sunshine, turned my collar up against the Gulf breeze, and called Elliot before I reached my car. I have the drive, I said. A pause. Then get to Lorraine Beckett this afternoon. We need her contract before Conrad will move. Lorraine Beckett lived in a cream-colored bungalow on Thomason Drive in East Naples, 12 minutes from the marina where her husband had kept his boat for 31 years. I had looked up the address through the county property records, which was public information, and therefore something Elliot had not told me I could not do. The flower boxes under the front windows were empty. The welcome mat on the porch was faded to the point where the original pattern was no longer distinguishable. These were the details of a house that had gotten smaller after someone left it. I sat in my car at the curb for 2 full minutes before I got out. I had no script for this. There was no version of what I was about to do that was not at its core a 60-year-old man walking up to a 71-year-old widow's door to tell her that the money her late husband had spent 31 years helping her save was gone because my son had taken it. I got out of the car. She answered on the second knock. Lorraine Beckett was a small woman with white hair cut short and practical. The kind of face that had once been pretty in a specific open way and had aged into something better, more particular, more earned. She was wearing a house dress and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and she looked at me with the careful assessing expression of a woman who had learned to be cautious about strangers at the door. "Mrs. Beckett," I said, "my name is Warren Holt. I believe you may have been a client of Holt Investments." The next few months were a blur of legal meetings, depositions, and the slow, painful unraveling of Garrett and Vivian's intricate web of deceit. The external drive Shelby provided was a goldmine of evidence, meticulously detailing inflated returns, phantom investments, and illicit offshore transfers. The internal memos folder revealed a chilling correspondence between Garrett and Vivian, outlining their strategies to manipulate client statements and silence any potential whistleblowers. Vivian's finance degree was, of course, a complete fabrication, a carefully constructed lie to lend her credibility in the eyes of investors. The most difficult part was contacting the victims. Each conversation was a fresh stab to my conscience, a reminder of the trust my son had betrayed. Lorraine Beckett, in particular, became a symbol of their callousness. Her late husband Frank, a lifelong friend of my own father, had entrusted his entire life savings to Garrett, believing he was investing in a bright future for his widow. The discovery that it was all gone, vanished into the ether of fraudulent schemes, was devastating. Yet Lorraine faced it with a quiet dignity that humbled me. She didn't cry, not once, but her eyes held a deep, unshakable sorrow that spoke volumes. Caroline was my rock through it all. She stood by me, her own pain palpable, but her resolve unwavering. Our daughter, Paige, initially struggled with the news, grappling with the betrayal of her brother. But eventually, she too understood the necessity of what we were doing. This wasn't just about justice. It was about truth, about righting a terrible wrong, no matter how painful. The day of the sentencing arrived, heavy with the weight of expectation and dread. The courtroom was packed, a silent testament to the lives Garrett and Vivian had impacted. Roland, my old friend from Fort Bragg, sat beside me, his presence a comforting anchor. Chester, a retired detective who had helped us navigate the initial stages, sat on my other side, his gaze steady and knowing. Lorraine Beckett was there too, her small frame radiating a quiet strength. The Honorable Sandra Briggs read the sentences with the care of someone who understood that her words would follow everyone in the room for the rest of their lives, and who intended them to be accurate rather than theatrical. Garrett Warren Holt, 2 counts wire fraud, 1 count securities fraud, 1 count elder financial abuse. Full cooperation with federal investigators. Thoroughly documented. 6 years, 11 months federal custody, with good conduct credit applicable under federal guidelines. Full restitution of $4.7 million to be distributed pro rata across all verified victims, with the first disbursement within 90 days of the judgment order. Garrett nodded once, as if confirming something he had already made peace with and did not need to hear twice. His shoulders settled slightly, not with relief exactly, but with the specific quiet of a man for whom uncertainty has finally ended, even if what replaced it is hard. Vivian Cross, 4 counts wire fraud, 2 counts securities fraud, 1 count elder financial abuse, 1 count obstruction of justice. No cooperation offered at any stage of the proceedings. 17 years federal custody. Full restitution jointly and severally liable with co-defendant. The gallery did not erupt. It exhaled a long, collective breath. The sound of a room full of people releasing something they had been holding since a Friday night party on Port Royal Drive, more than a year ago. On the courthouse steps, Roland took my hand in both of his. His grip was the same grip it had always been, the handshake from Fort Bragg, the one that meant more than a handshake. "It does not bring it back," he said, "but it counts for something that you stood where you stood." Chester said nothing. He looked at me in a way that said everything words would have crowded out. The specific look of a man who has faced enough hard things in his life to know that some of them get faced honestly and some of them do not, and that this one had. Lorraine held my hand for a moment at the bottom of the steps. She did not cry. She had not cried once in all the times I had spoken with her over the preceding year, and I had come to understand that this was not hardness, but something else. the particular composure of someone who has already done their grieving and decided that what comes after grief is simply living. Frank would have been glad there were still people like you, she said. I did not know how to receive that. I thanked her and felt the weight of it settle somewhere deep and permanent, the way certain things settle when you understand they will not move again. Caroline found me at the car. Paige stood beside her with her arm around her mother's shoulders, her jaw set and her eyes wet in the way they got when she was feeling something she had decided not to name out loud. The three of us stood in the courthouse parking lot for a moment, saying nothing. And then we got in the car and drove north on I-75, without the radio on, watching the Coosawhatchee fall behind us and the flat green expanse of South Florida open ahead. Ordinary, enormous, entirely unchanged. The way the world continues after the things that alter you completely. I have carried this family story longer than I expected. There were signs I chose not to read, moments where I told myself a father's instinct was just anxiety. This family betrayal did not begin the night at Port Royal Drive. It began years earlier, in small choices no one named out loud. My personal belief, as a man who carries his faith quietly, is that God does not ask us to be perfect fathers. He asks us to be honest ones. I was not honest with myself soon enough. So if this family story reaches anyone sitting with an uneasy feeling they have been explaining away about a child, a partner, anyone, I would say this: do not wait for certainty before you ask the hard question. Certainty arrives after the damage, not before. Do not be like me. Ask sooner. This family betrayal cost real people, real money, real sleep, real grief. The only thing that made it survivable was choosing truth over comfort when it mattered most.